Sometimes, power reveals more about the person holding it than the person standing in front of it. And sometimes, a single moment on an ordinary street can change how an entire crowd sees the world. The afternoon sun hung low over the city, reflecting off storefront windows and turning the sidewalks into rivers of warm light. People moved quickly, carrying coffee, answering calls, rushing between responsibilities that felt urgent in the moment. And in the middle of it all, walked a man who moved differently. Not slower, not distracted, just calm. His name was Marcus Hale, and if you had passed him on the street, you might have noticed nothing unusual at all. Simple clothes, relaxed posture, eyes that seemed to observe more than they reacted. He walked like someone who had already learned patience, not because life had been easy, but because reacting to every challenge had never helped him survive. He crossed the street just as the light changed, hands loosely in his pockets, mind focused on the meeting ahead. A meeting that could change more than just his own future. But no one around him knew that. Not yet. The sound of a police siren broke the calm, not loud enough to signal danger, just sharp enough to turn heads. A patrol car slowed beside the curb. People glanced briefly, then continued walking. Most assumed it wasn't about them, until the car stopped directly beside Marcus. The passenger door opened. An officer stepped out. Tall, rigid posture, face tight with authority that felt more defensive than confident. His name badge read, Officer Grant. "Hey," the officer said sharply. Marcus stopped, turned slowly. "Yes? Come here a second." It wasn't a request. Marcus walked closer calmly. "What's going on?" he asked. Officer Grant looked him up and down, quickly, clinically, as if searching for confirmation of something he had already decided. "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked. Marcus blinked once. "From lunch." "Where exactly?" Marcus pointed behind him. "Cafe on 5th. The officer nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't soften. "Got ID on you?" Marcus hesitated briefly, not from fear, but from confusion. "Is there a reason you stopped me?" The officer's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm asking the questions." The tone shifted the energy instantly. People nearby slowed. Some pretended not to watch. Others stopped openly. Because everyone recognizes tension, even when they don't understand it yet. Marcus reached slowly into his pocket and handed over his wallet. Officer Grant took it without saying, "Thank you." He opened it quickly, scanning, not looking at Marcus anymore, looking through him. Marcus stood quietly, hands visible, breathing steady, not submissive, not confrontational, just present. Because he had learned long ago that calm unsettles people who expect resistance. Across the street, a woman paused near a bus stop. Her name was Elena. She wasn't part of the situation, but something about the interaction made her stay. It wasn't just the stop. It was the tone, the way the officer's voice carried assumption instead of curiosity. Elena watched carefully. Because witnesses matter. They shape how stories are remembered. Officer Grant handed the wallet back slowly. "What do you do for work?" he asked. Marcus met his eyes calmly. "I consult." "Consult what?" "Financial strategy." The officer smirked faintly, not openly rude, but dismissive. "Right," he said. Marcus noticed the reaction. He didn't respond to it. Because sometimes silence is stronger than correction. Another officer remained inside the patrol car, watching. Radio crackled softly. Cars passed. The city continued moving. But the moment felt suspended. "Mind telling me why you're in this area?" Officer Grant asked. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "I live nearby." "Where?" Marcus gestured toward a residential building visible at the end of the street. Officer Grant followed the direction with his eyes, then looked back. Something in his expression hardened. "You match a description," he said. The words landed heavily. Marcus nodded slowly. "What description?" "Just routine," the officer replied. But routine didn't feel neutral. Routine felt personal. Elena shifted closer, not interfering, just watching. Her presence added weight. Because when someone sees injustice, silence becomes a choice. And the officer felt it. He glanced toward the small gathering crowd forming quietly. His posture grew more rigid, authority challenged by attention. "Turn around," Officer Grant said suddenly. Marcus paused. "Why?" The officer's tone sharpened. "Just comply." The word hung in the air, heavy, loaded. Marcus took a slow breath, not defiant, but thoughtful. And that moment and that single hesitation changed everything. Because the officer interpreted it as resistance, and the crowd interpreted it as restraint. Two completely different stories unfolding at once, and what nobody standing there realized was that Marcus wasn't just another pedestrian caught in a misunderstanding. He wasn't just someone trying to get through the day unnoticed. He had walked into that moment carrying something none of them expected, not anger, not fear, but authority far beyond the badge in front of him. Authority that would soon shift the entire balance of power. Sometimes, power speaks louder through silence than through commands. And sometimes, the moment everyone expects conflict is the moment someone chooses calm instead. Marcus turned slowly as the officer ordered, not rushed, not defiant, just deliberate. His movements were controlled, steady, the kind of calm that comes from years of navigating situations where emotions could easily spiral out of control. Officer Grant watched closely, too closely, like he was waiting for a mistake, waiting for confirmation of something he had already decided was true. The crowd around them grew slightly. People paused at the edge of the sidewalk. Some pretended to check their phones while listening. Others watched openly. Because everyone senses when something isn't right, even before they can explain why. "Hands where I can see them," Officer Grant said. Marcus raised his hands slowly, no sudden movements, no visible frustration, just patience. But patience can feel threatening to someone expecting resistance. Grant's posture stiffened. "You nervous?" the officer asked. Marcus met his eyes calmly. "No." The answer landed heavier than expected. Grant frowned slightly. People who stay calm during pressure often make others uncomfortable, especially those who expect fear. Elena shifted closer again, staying just outside the invisible boundary of the interaction. She noticed something subtle. The officer wasn't responding to Marcus's actions. He was reacting to his assumptions, and assumptions, once formed, rarely dissolve easily. "Turn around fully," Grant said. Marcus complied. The officer stepped closer, close enough that the crowd leaned forward unconsciously. Grant's hand hovered near his radio. "Just making sure everything checks out," he muttered. But the words didn't sound reassuring. They sounded defensive. Another patrol car slowed at the intersection, not stopping, just observing. The city noise softened as tension filled the air. People felt it. That heavy quiet before something shifts. "Why are you really here?" Grant asked suddenly. Marcus blinked once. "I told you. I live nearby." Grant shook his head slightly. "No, I mean, today." Marcus hesitated briefly, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he recognized something deeper behind the question. Suspicion without evidence. "I'm heading to a meeting," Marcus said calmly. "What kind of meeting?" "A professional one." Grant smirked faintly again. "What kind of professional meeting happens around here?" The tone carried more accusation than curiosity, and the crowd felt it. Some exchanged glances. A man near the bus stop shook his head quietly, but no one stepped forward. Not yet. Marcus lowered his hands slightly. Grant immediately reacted. "Keep your hands up," he snapped. Marcus raised them again, slowly, still calm, and that calm began to shift the energy, because the crowd expected escalation. But Marcus gave them something else. Control. Elena finally spoke softly from behind. "Officer," she said carefully. Grant turned sharply. "Yes?" Her voice stayed steady. "Is there a reason for this stop?" Grant's expression tightened. "Ma'am, please step back." "I'm just asking," she said gently. Grant's jaw flexed. "This doesn't concern you." But the crowd heard the exchange. And now the moment felt public, witnessed, real. Grant turned back to Marcus. "You said you work in finance," he said. "Yes." "What company?" Marcus paused. He could have answered immediately. But something about the moment made him hesitate. Not out of fear, out of intention. He was measuring, watching, learning who this officer was becoming through the interaction. "I'll explain," Marcus said finally. Grant scoffed lightly. "Yeah, I bet." The words landed heavier than he intended, and even Grant seemed to realize it. But pride prevented correction. A man filming quietly from across the street adjusted his angle. Not aggressively, just documenting. Phones change everything. They transform private assumptions into public records. Grant noticed the phone. His shoulders stiffened further, authority mixed with pressure. "Empty your pockets," Grant said. The command hung heavy. Marcus hesitated again, not refusing, just processing, because each step felt less like routine and more like something else, something personal. And still, Marcus remained calm, because he understood something the officer did not. This moment was moving toward a turning point, not because of anger, not because of confrontation, but because truth was slowly closing in. And when truth arrives, power often shifts instantly. Elena stepped slightly closer again. The crowd held its breath. Grant watched Marcus carefully, waiting, judging, expecting, and what he didn't realize was that the man standing in front of him was not powerless, not ordinary, not someone who would walk away quietly from being misjudged. Marcus was carrying authority far beyond the badge in front of him. Authority that would soon change not just the officer's expression, but the entire meaning of this moment. Sometimes, the loudest moment isn't when voices rise. It's when silence becomes heavy enough that everyone feels it. And that silence had settled over the sidewalk now. Marcus slowly emptied his pockets as instructed. Keys, phone, wallet already checked. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, nothing that justified the tension hanging in the air. Officer Grant watched every movement carefully, but there was something different in his expression now. Not certainty, not confidence, something closer to frustration. Because Marcus wasn't reacting the way he expected. No anger, no fear, no defensiveness, just calm. And calm people are difficult to control when you expect chaos. "What's your full name?" Grant asked. "Marcus Hale." Grant repeated it quietly, like testing how it sounded. Then he stepped back slightly, speaking into his radio. The words were too low for the crowd to hear clearly. But everyone sensed the shift. This was becoming something bigger than a routine stop. Elena crossed her arms gently, watching. She noticed Marcus's posture, straight, relaxed, not stiff like someone intimidated, not aggressive like someone preparing for confrontation. He stood like someone who had nothing to prove, and that unsettled the officer even more. A man in a business suit stopped beside Elena. "What's going on?" he whispered. She shook her head slightly. "I don't know, but it doesn't feel right." The man nodded slowly. More people gathered quietly now, some filming, some just observing. The crowd wasn't loud, but their presence changed the balance. Authority becomes heavier when witnessed. Grant finished speaking into the radio. He turned back toward Marcus. "You said you work in finance," he repeated. "Yes." Grant hesitated. "What company?" Marcus paused again, and this time the hesitation felt intentional, not evasive, measured, as if he were deciding how much of the truth to reveal. "I consult for multiple organizations," Marcus said finally. Grant's eyes narrowed. "That's vague." "It's accurate," Marcus replied calmly. The answer wasn't defensive, just factual. And that frustrated Grant more than resistance would have. Across the street, another officer exited the second patrol car and began walking toward them. Slower, more cautious. He scanned the scene, noticing the crowd, noticing the filming, noticing Marcus's calm demeanor. Something in his expression suggested curiosity rather than suspicion, and that difference mattered, because not all authority reacts the same way. Grant stepped closer again. "Turn around," he said. Marcus complied again without hesitation. Grant began a pat-down search. The crowd grew quieter. Every movement felt magnified. Elena felt tension rise in her chest. Not fear, but anticipation, like watching a moment that would later feel important. Halfway through the search, Grant paused. Something shifted in his expression. Confusion. He pulled back slightly. "What's this?" he asked. Marcus glanced down briefly. Grant held up a small card. Not flashy, simple, but official-looking. Marcus's company identification. Grant examined it closely. His eyes scanned the name again. Then, the title. A faint flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but pride pushed it away quickly. "Consultant?" he said dismissively. Marcus nodded. "Yes." Grant handed it back quickly, as if it meant nothing. But something had changed. The certainty in his movements felt slightly weaker. The second officer arrived beside them. "What's the situation?" he asked quietly. Grant kept his eyes on Marcus. "Possible match to description," he said. The second officer glanced at Marcus briefly. Not suspicious, just observant. Then he looked at the growing crowd. Phones raised, energy heavy. "Everything okay here?" he asked calmly. Marcus met his gaze. "Yes," he said. Two simple words, but they carried weight. Because Marcus wasn't accusing, wasn't escalating, just existing calmly inside the moment. And that began shifting how the second officer saw the situation. Elena noticed it too. The difference between the two officers, one searching for justification, the other searching for understanding. And that contrast began changing the crowd's perception. Grant stepped back slightly, still unsure, still unwilling to admit uncertainty. "What meeting did you say you were going to?" he asked. Marcus took a slow breath, then finally answered more directly. "A leadership meeting." Grant smirked again, faintly. "Leadership," he repeated. The word sounded sarcastic, but Marcus didn't react. He just nodded. "Yes." And in that moment, something invisible shifted, not because of the word itself, but because of how Marcus said it. No exaggeration, no arrogance, just certainty. And the second officer noticed. His eyes lingered slightly longer, as if trying to place a memory, or a face, or a name he had heard somewhere before. The crowd leaned in emotionally now. They didn't know why, but they felt it. The sense that this moment was moving towards something unexpected, that the balance of power wasn't as simple as it first appeared. Grant stepped closer one last time, voice firmer. "You're free to go, for now," he said. The words sounded like control, but they felt like retreat. Marcus nodded slightly. "Thank you." But he didn't move immediately, and that small pause made the air feel electric, because it suggested something more was coming, something Grant hadn't anticipated, something that would soon reveal the truth hiding just beneath the surface. Sometimes power doesn't disappear. It just changes direction. And when it does, everyone feels it before they understand why. Marcus still stood where the officer had left him, technically free to go. But the moment wasn't finished, not emotionally, not socially, and definitely not psychologically. The crowd lingered, phones lowered slightly, but no one walked away yet, because something unfinished hung in the air, something unresolved. Officer Grant adjusted his stance, trying to regain control of the moment. "You can move along," he repeated, more firmly this time. Marcus nodded slowly, but instead of immediately walking away, he spoke calmly. "Officer?" he said. Grant stiffened slightly. "Yes?" Marcus's voice remained respectful, measured. "I understand you're doing your job, but may I ask what specific description I matched?" The question wasn't aggressive, it wasn't accusatory, but it shifted the dynamic instantly. Because now, the officer had to justify, and justification creates pressure. Grant hesitated, only for a second, but everyone saw it. "It's part of an ongoing investigation," he replied. Marcus nodded again. "I understand." A small pause, then, "I just want to make sure I'm being treated fairly." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Not anger, not accusation, just truth. And that made them harder to dismiss. The second officer watched closely now. His expression changed, less defensive, more thoughtful. Because Marcus's tone didn't match someone hiding something. It matched someone who knew exactly where he stood, and that realization planted the first real crack in Grant's confidence. Elena noticed the shift immediately. Grant's shoulders tightened, his eyes flicked toward the crowd again, toward the phones, toward the witnesses. Authority feels heavier when observed. "Like I said," Grant replied, voice slightly sharper now, "you matched a description." Marcus nodded once more. But this time, his calm felt different, stronger, more grounded, like someone who knew something the others didn't. And the crowd felt it too. The energy shifted subtly, from suspicion to curiosity. A black sedan slowed at the intersection nearby. Expensive, quiet engine, tinted windows. No one paid attention at first, just another car in the city. But the second officer noticed. His eyes lingered slightly longer. Recognition flickered across his face, faint, uncertain. Grant didn't notice. He was too focused on maintaining control. "Look," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "you're free to go. Let's just leave it there." Marcus smiled gently, not mocking, not triumphant, just calm. "I appreciate that," he said, and for a moment it seemed like the situation might end quietly, like the tension would dissolve into the everyday noise of the city. But then, the sedan stopped, right beside the sidewalk. Door opened. A sharply dressed woman stepped out. Confident posture, professional energy. She scanned the scene quickly. Her eyes landed on Marcus and immediately softened. "Mr. Hale," she said clearly. The name carried across the sidewalk. The crowd heard it. Grant heard it. The second officer's eyes widened slightly. Marcus nodded politely. "Good afternoon," he replied. She turned toward Officer Grant. Professional smile, controlled. "Is there a problem here?" Grant's expression shifted instantly. "Ma'am, this is a police matter." Her smile didn't disappear, but it sharpened. "I understand," she said calmly. "However, Mr. Hale is expected at a meeting we are already late for." The words landed heavily. Expected. Meeting. Professional authority. Grant glanced back at Marcus. Something about the situation began to feel unstable, like the narrative he had created no longer fit. "Who are you?" Grant asked. She handed him a business card. Grant took it, read it. And for the first time since the stop began, real uncertainty crossed his face. The second officer leaned slightly closer, trying to read it too. And that was the moment the energy truly changed. Because Grant realized something. This man wasn't just another pedestrian. This wasn't just routine. And whatever was about to happen next was going to change how this moment ended. Marcus remained calm, unmoved, patient. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he understood something deeper. When people reveal their assumptions openly, truth doesn't need to fight. It only needs to arrive. And truth was now standing directly in front of Officer Grant. The air on the sidewalk felt different now. Not louder, not chaotic, just heavier. Like everyone present sensed that the moment had shifted beyond what it had been minutes earlier. Officer Grant stared at the business card in his hand longer than necessary. His eyes moved slowly across the printed words. Then back to Marcus. Then back to the card again. The confidence that had filled his posture earlier began to fade, replaced by something quieter. Uncertainty. The woman standing beside Marcus spoke calmly. "We're already behind schedule," she said. "The board has been waiting." The word board landed heavily. Not dramatic, just precise. Grant blinked. "What board?" he asked. Her expression remained professional. "The oversight board for the city's financial ethics division." The second officer's posture changed instantly. Recognition flashed across his face. He stepped slightly forward. "Marcus Hale?" he asked carefully. Marcus turned toward him. "Yes." The officer nodded slowly, realization settling in. "I've seen your name before," he said quietly. Grant looked between them, confusion turning quickly into discomfort. "What is this?" he demanded. The woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Hale leads the independent review committee currently evaluating department conduct standards," she said calmly. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. The crowd murmured softly. Phones lowered slightly as people tried to process what they were hearing. Grant's face tightened. He swallowed. "You're saying he's—" Marcus spoke gently before she finished. "I'm part of the team reviewing community interaction policies," he said. No arrogance, no triumph. Just truth. Silence stretched across the sidewalk, long enough that every sound from passing cars felt distant. Grant's posture shifted subtly. The authority he had carried earlier felt unstable now. Because the narrative had changed, the man he had assumed was powerless was not. "I didn't know," Grant said finally. The words sounded smaller than he expected. Marcus nodded. "I understand." And that response, calm, forgiving, without accusation, felt heavier than anger would have, because it forced reflection. Elena watched closely. The emotional tone changed, not tension anymore, not fear, something closer to awareness. People around them began to understand that they had witnessed more than a routine stop. They had watched assumptions unfold in real time. Grant cleared his throat. "If I made a mistake," Marcus interrupted gently, "this isn't about punishment." Grant stopped speaking. The unexpected grace caught him off guard. Marcus continued. "It's about understanding how moments like this feel from both sides." The crowd listened carefully now. No one moved, no one interrupted, because truth spoken calmly carries its own gravity. The second officer shifted his weight. He glanced toward Grant, then back toward Marcus. Respect had replaced uncertainty in his expression. "I think we're good here," he said quietly. Grant nodded slowly, but he didn't look relieved. He looked thoughtful, like someone replaying every second of the interaction in his mind. Marcus stepped forward slightly, not to challenge, just to close the emotional distance. "I know your job isn't easy," he said. Grant looked up, surprised. "But assumptions," Marcus continued gently, change how power feels to the person on the receiving end. Grant exhaled slowly. The words landed deeper than criticism, because they weren't meant to shame. They were meant to teach. The crowd began dispersing slowly. Energy softened. Phones lowered completely. The moment that had drawn strangers together began dissolving back into ordinary city life. But everyone who had watched knew they had seen something meaningful, something that would stay with them. Marcus turned toward the woman beside him. "Shall we?" he asked. She nodded. They began walking toward the waiting car. Grant watched them go, not with resentment, not with embarrassment, but with reflection. And that was the real change. Before stepping into the car, Marcus turned back briefly. Not dramatic, just one final look. Grant met his eyes. Marcus gave a small nod. Not approval, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. And that single gesture carried more weight than words. The car door closed softly. Engine started. And as the vehicle pulled away, the street returned to normal. People walked, cars moved, conversations resumed. But something invisible had shifted, not just for Grant, for everyone who had watched, because they had seen how quickly perception can become reality, and how quickly reality can change when truth appears. Marcus leaned back in his seat quietly. No smile of victory. No anger left behind. Just calm. Because real authority doesn't need to prove itself loudly. It only needs to exist. And maybe the most powerful lesson wasn't about regret at all. It was about awareness, about the invisible weight carried by assumptions, and about how every moment of power is also a moment of choice.